Welcome, I'm James Jenkins and Sean Dimitri, and you're watching What's Your Story, Vancouver. Today on the show, a very special Vancouver story and guest, Mr. Neate Jr., also Hall of Famer, I should add. Can you maybe elaborate on?
Yeah, I was a number of years ago. I was elected to the BC Restaurant Association Hall of Fame in a newly created category for coffee, which they finally decided to recognize the 2,500 cafes that are in Vancouver.
Why do you think the coffee's so big in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, I think we have to give Starbucks a lot of credit, but I guess the other thing is, it's a legal drug and people need it, and they really find that coffee enhances their day, helps them to get up, it helps them to rob the sleep devil, so that they can still function after 5 hours of sleep. It helps them be alert for tests, and it just makes them feel good. On top of that, what's really changed coffee over the last, I've been in coffee since 1979, but what's really changed is people are starting to look at coffee like wine. And so they are seeing the wonderful taste benefits of coffee because a lot of people are moving away from having sugar and cream. And if you have sugar and cream, you know what I always say, if you have sugar and cream, you can't tell the difference between shit and shinola. But if you drink it black, as you are, as we are, there's some unique nuance to coffee that makes it very special.
You can taste it, basically.
You can taste really good coffee, just like you can taste really good wine. You take cheap wine that's had sugar added to it, and it all kind of tastes the same, and they can make it high alcohol. But the same with coffee, it can be masked by going with a dark roast. And if you dark roast coffee, you actually roast away all the nuance of coffee. And so lighter roast coffee, and I'm not saying super light, because some people roast with a candle. They roast it so light it's still got grassy flavors to it. But dark roast takes away the nuance. So the sweet spot with great coffee is right after what's called the first crack. And it allows, the sugars have caramelized, and the coffee has doubled in size from the green coffee bean. And that's when it's really good. And so you take something like Ethiopian coffee, and there's a whole bunch of different Ethiopians, but what they're famous for is their natural coffees. So they have some really fruity blueberry characteristics. You take Kenya, which has got acidity, some beautiful black currant taste to it. The El Salvador you're drinking right now, which is just really a nice balanced coffee, got a slight cedary flavor to it. But all these coffees, it's so exciting. They have all these different flavors, just as you can see the differences between a Napa Cab and a Bordeaux, which is predominantly Cab, or something super Tuscan from Italy, which has got huge Cab. But they're all different because they're grown on different soils with different people making different decisions as to how long they're staying in the barrel and all that kind of stuff. So we make all those decisions. That roast choice that we make, in terms of if we drop a coffee at 408 degrees or 410 degrees, changes the coffee dramatically in terms of what ends up in the cup.
Well, I can tell you're really passionate about coffee. You mentioned 1979. Can
Yes.
you maybe give us a little bit of a bio on yourself and your
Sure.
family?
Yeah, so my grandparents started roasting in Vancouver in the 20s. And my grandfather was encouraged to go on his own. He had a guy that was what we would call today a joint venture capitalist that came up with $5,000, and my grandfather came up with $5,000, and they started a company called Neate's Coffee. And that was strictly a wholesale business. And my father joined them in the 50s. And that fellow actually that was with my grandfather was a silent partner. But my grandfather was very passionate about roasting and about coffee, and he was 100% in the wholesale business. And so in 1975, I graduated from high school, but I was on a social work bent. I wanted to save the world, and it was working with delinquent kids, was working with the police and the probation services, and on the good side. And then my dad came to me and said, "Look, if you're not interested in getting in the business, I'm just going to sell it. but if you would give me 2 years, then we'll see if you like it. And so in 1979, I joined him and fell in love with the business. Really enjoy people, enjoyed challenge, love selling. I never realized how much I enjoyed selling. A lot of people have trouble getting doors slammed in my face, but I just figured out another way to open it. And so I was pretty good at that. And so that went well, but this partnership that my grandfather started in 1945 didn't transfer to his partner's son. And because my grandfather and this guy had a handshake deal, nothing written down, we ended up in it never went to court, but it was basically it was easier to sell it. So in 1990, we sold the business to Nestle, which huge multinational, one of the biggest food companies in the world, which was quite different than little Neate's Coffee, Vancouver company. But I enjoyed that challenge as well. I moved up the ranks, became the regional manager in BC, but predominantly just selling. Still had input on the coffee that I sold, but I really wanted out. I wanted to do my own thing, and so in 1996, I was able to get out of my non-compete agreement with Nestle. They were very gracious about that, and bought a company that was called The Coffee Roaster that had a location on Granville Island and another one on Powell Street, and they roasted in both those locations. And so I took that over, and part of my non-compete was for 3 years I couldn't compete in the wholesale business.
Okay. So
I was forced to learn the retail business, which I absolutely loved. And the reason why I loved it so much is I was able to roast coffee, and I just decided to roast coffee every day, and then I would get almost immediate response from customers, which I thought was amazing, versus when I was with Nestle, coffee was 2 to 3 to 4 weeks old. Yeah. It was shipped out to customers who I never saw, and would get input, a year later saying, your coffee's not very good, so I'm quitting.
Oh, really?
That kind of stuff, So the retail environment was something that I really thrived in, and I love design, I love woodwork. I build a lot of my own stuff. As you know, my son, who's taken my talents and tripled them, he's fabulous with woodwork.
His son is James Neate, which we had on the show earlier. Maybe Sean can cue a little clip of that. He also works with his hands and wood. He
does, and actually he's working with us again right now. He's doing some great stuff. And he takes part in, we just took over a new facility in the Big Bend area, Burnaby, big commissary, and he's been instrumental in building a lot of the furniture that's going into our office. So that's really cool. So back to my story. So I had 2 locations, and at the time when I was looking to buy a roaster, I went around to every roaster in Vancouver pitching, trying to buy them. And shortly there, 2 years after I was doing the coffee roaster, which I converted the name to JJBEAN, because I wanted customers to know who I was, and a lot of wholesale customers knew me as JJ, because I was John Jr., my dad was Big John. Whenever they phoned the office, they always called me JJ. And one of the deals I had with Nestle, I wasn't allowed to use my name, which Neate was very famous for coffee in Vancouver on the wholesale.
They had purchased that name, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they didn't purchase JJ.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a trick. And the other cool thing about it was a good friend of mine, Ron Bear, who and I worked with at Nestle. We were sketching out on a napkin one night at a bar in Seattle, and I said, "Hey, I got this idea." He says, "John," he says, "I already got it. Got the idea right here." And we were all dressed in, in suits and stuff, which I never wear anymore. But he said, "Well, let's do some research." I said, "Okay, what do you have in mind?" He says, "Well, let's ask everybody what they think of JJBEAN." So we, went around the bar talking to different people, and we talked to probably 10 people. Of the 10 people, 8 people had heard of JJBEAN, and 1 person had it and thought it was an incredible product. So we thought, that's the name we're going with. And then one of the problems was, or the reason why they thought they'd heard about, was LL Bean. And LL Bean, especially in Seattle, is huge mail order thing, and so people were confusing the LL Bean with JJBEAN. And even when we first made the name here in Vancouver, so many people thought we were an American coffee company.
Okay.
So the JJBEAN stuck, and today most people refer to us as JJ, which is great. You know, so we've now got 19 stores. We've got 4 in Toronto, with number 5 opening probably in February. And things are going great. We have lots of opportunities. The brand is very strong. We launched cold brew 2 years ago in all the Save-Ons. We have a JJBEAN 1 liter pack. We hope to move to the single serve cans next year. But that's a really great little sideline we're doing as well.
Exactly. Well, cold brew is really taken off.
Sure has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's nitros.
Nitro's the next big thing, and that's what we hope to have. But it's hard to produce the cans. We need to commit to about 22,000 units.
Okay.
So, and it does have a shelf life. So we just found somebody that's got the technology in August. But launching it in August when you're going into the winter season is not a good idea. So we're probably going to launch next April, May.
So 19 stores in Vancouver. Your first one was at Granville Island. I've been there many times.
Yes.
It has a very unique look. Every store has, like you said, you love design.
Yes.
What inspires you with your design for each location?
Yeah, I certainly can't take credit for myself, but I mean, I take credit for the fact that I spend a lot of money on design. There's a fellow by the name of Brady Dunlop that works with a company that used to be called Hotzenbacher Boniface Hayden, and now it's called Dialogue. And I met Brady probably 13 years ago when I actually purchased this site we're in right now. They used to be a G&F financial bank. And I'll back up. Yep. So the first site that I renovated was our commercial drive store. And the commercial drive store was totally my design, and it's kind of rustic. It's kind of like you'd see in a lot of cafes in Seattle and stuff. And it's very homey, and it's still our #1 store, which I remind Brady of all the time, because everybody says about how great his design is. And I said, look, man, I designed the first one, and it's still the busiest. Anyways, it's a joke we have. But he is a real master of doing it right. What we do is he asks me questions. That's how we started, but now I come to him because I know the questions he's going to answer. So he says, so what do you think about this neighborhood? What do you think about this building? What's your initial thoughts in terms of where you'd like to go with it? And so, for example, on Main Street here, he said, what do you think? And I said, well, I hate the interior. It was a bank. But I said, what I love is the outside, there is this granite. And this granite, I said, it reminds me of the granite that was in our basement fireplace in the house I grew up in. And I said, we're not touching that. That's the one thing that we're going to keep. He says, good. So what do you think? And I said, well, why don't we build off that? He said, off your parents' basement's fireplace? He said, perfect. And so he came up with this idea. You can even see it here. So in my parents' basement, and maybe your parents' basement, or maybe your parents' basement, we had this fake wood paneling, okay? And it had these black lines in it, this far apart, these little black lines and it was basically drawn in. It wasn't great, but it was the cheapest kind of way to decorate a rec room. Yeah. And so that was one thing. The next thing was it had this really nice hearth you could sit on at the fire. So that was great. So he said, okay, I can work with both those things. And I said, great. I said, what's your idea? He said, we're going to get a particular cut of oak. This is called rift cut oak. And we're going to mount the panels so that they're about 1/4 inch apart, as you can see right over there. And that shadow line is going to mimic that line that on those fake oak panels, but now we're going to make real oak panels. And what I'm also going to do, because I like to look at it, when you go upstairs, you'll see all of those panels are mounted at a slight angle. And it creates a nice shadow effect. And then the fireplace, Brady and I probably spent, I don't know, 20 hours mocking up how that fireplace looks upstairs because I wanted it to be the center of the design. So Brady makes all the final decisions, but I say no or yes, and I'm very involved in that. But he's the master by far. And then, so every location, so one of my favorite locations is Alberni and Butte, and we have these huge 20-foot ceilings. But we're right in the middle of Robson Street, which is, the fashion center of Vancouver for sure, if not Canada. And so what he created there, and it's just brilliant on his part. So when you walk in on Alberni Street, we got mirrors, so you can see how good you look, right? And then you go order your coffee, and then you go up this stairway, which again has a mirror, so you can just make sure you look good. And then you walk around and you walk along this, basically a catwalk, all the way across.
Been there many times.
And so the whole idea is to see and be seen. And then outside on the bathroom wall, we have a really cool old 30s model picture. And most people think it's part of the liquor store, but it's actually ours. Anyway, so he's just designed everything for the neighborhood, and it fits in beautifully.
Well, it's a 2-story actually too, as well. You go upstairs and there's tables as well.
Yes.
At the Alberni location.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. So I could tell you, I could spend all day talking about each of the locations, how we came up with the ideas. But on top of that, the guy that I really got to give credit to is a guy named Neto Franco, who has been with me almost the same amount of time as Brady, and he builds all our stores. He builds our stores here, and he builds our stores in Toronto. So he does an amazing implementation of Brady's idea, and he takes part in a lot of the design decisions because he tells me, no, Brady's idea is ridiculous. It's going to cost us so much money. What about this? And so it's a great partnership in terms of design and keeping our costs somewhat reasonable because after all, we're selling a cup of coffee, not, average check of $60.
Exactly.
So it is challenging.
Yeah. You started off with one, now you're at 23 locations. How many staff are you?
We've got 350 staff.
Wow.
About 350 in terms of your part-time and full-time, probably more than that now.
Do you have a motto or
a mission statement?
A mission statement, that's what I'm looking for.
We
Do you have
do.
a mission statement regarding staff and the way you run your business?
Our whole culture is about honoring people and honoring place and honoring coffee. So our mission statement is to honor people through coffee, customer service, food and amazing, or bakery products and amazing spaces. So every one of those 4 facets are really the key to getting everybody on board with what JJBEAN's all about. So in terms of, and you can tell me to stop if I'm boring you, but to go through each of those 4 things, how we honor people, we believe the greatest way to honor people is through communication. Every person, whether they're a barista or a driver or a repair person, the greatest way you can honor them is actually giving them a voice. So what we've done as a company is we pay people to meet at least every 2 weeks. So we have a wholesale meeting every 2 weeks. We have a bakery meeting every 2 weeks. We have an SLT meeting, which is the 3 of us on top. We have a retail meeting every 2 weeks, and we close our stores down every 4 weeks at night and meet. So every decision that starts with our senior leadership team goes out to each of those different areas, and nothing is set in stone until everybody's had input.
That's great, because you never know who has a really good idea. Like, a barista could be, it makes them feel more important, and like I said, you never know who has this great idea that can
Exactly.
change the game.
Exactly, or there's different people. Everybody's got a different bent. Whether it's we do a lot of charity work, so people will say, "Hey, I know this guy that's doing this, and maybe we should consider doing that." Or somebody's got a passion about food. A lot of people have passion about great tasting food, but then, as you know, especially in Vancouver, there's a lot of subcultures. So there's the vegans, there's so many.
Gluten-free, there's vegetarians, there's
it goes on.
Yeah, exactly.
And within our company, there's a ton of those people as well. So, you know, we have almond milk, we have soy milk, we're looking at coconut milk, there's oat milk, there's so many different variations of what people want. Because I am just a guy passionate about great food, and we don't ever want to give up on that, but if someone says, hey, we can substitute corn syrup for honey, it's not going to have a significant taste difference, and now vegans can have it. So I don't come up with those ideas. Everybody else does. And we vet them. We go, no, it's too expensive, or no, it changes the flavor too much. But it's very exciting, the number of people that bring us these ideas. And I know the consumer really appreciates the consumer that's in these kind of food subcultures of what they can and cannot eat or choose not to eat. But the next part in terms of is the food. We're the only national company, there's a couple of locals now, but we're the only national company that has fresh baked goods. All our stores have double ovens, all our stores have bakers. We have a central commissary which produces the mixes. For example, all the muffin mixes are done on huge mixers that we have, but they're put into buckets, and then all those buckets are delivered to all our stores, along with every other thing we do. The only thing that we don't make in stores are sandwiches, which are made every day at this commissary. And because of waste and having all the ingredients, it didn't make sense. But everything, virtually everything other than the sandwich is baked off every morning at the stores. The other thing we do in terms of the places are very well designed, and two of them are to go only, Granville Island and CBC, although both have areas you can sit outside. But every one of our stores has a very large seating component. So we take very seriously the third place concept. Howard Schultz, who started Starbucks as we know it today, he didn't start the original Starbucks, but the Starbucks that we know today had this concept about the third place, that Starbucks wanted to be the place that you went that wasn't your home, that wasn't your office. Previously in our culture, that had been church or community centers, but and then it became, when I was growing up, it became pubs, but then a lot of people went, shoot, I can't drink too much or I can't drive home. And so coffee became that third place. And when I saw what Starbucks was doing, I applauded them, but I thought maybe I can do a little more. And so what I've done at all my stores is I've allowed probably 15 to 20% more seating area and bigger seats. My tables are 30 inches by 24, which is the largest tables you'll see in any coffee shops. But my point of view is I want to be able to have a plate with a sandwich, and another person have a plate and a sandwich and a coffee and maybe a side plate with a butter tart. And you can't fit that on one of these tiny tables that are in so many of these places. But when you put a bigger table in, you have to take up more space. And we also have really nice seats. So some people say, well, that's counterintuitive. You don't want really nice seats because then people will sit too long. But I go, no, knock your socks off. I'm all about people enjoying our cafes. And so because of that, our cafes have been the place where people go for their, all their social media dates. It's where the real estate guy goes to sign his deal. It's where the film producer goes to talk to his director. We're the place that people meet.
Basically, our show, we want to find out, come here and find out what makes you tick, what makes you so successful, and hopefully pass that on to our viewers that want to achieve something, their goals, their dreams. So basically, you mentioned before you worked with Nestle. What are some major things that you took away from that position?
Nestle was very oriented at making a profit. They have shareholders that they're responsible to, so I get that. And they're always about share price and how much they can return to the customer. I have a different viewpoint than that. I've naively believed I have a little bit of the Field of Dreams approach. If you do something really special, people will come. And I only want to do something that I really like. And as we've talked, I love food, I love coffee, I love wine, I love cocktails. I love anything that explodes in my mouth and is sensual. So I have that part. I love design. I build, what I still do actually, is I build all the bake cases for all the stores. And I'm quite proud of those with all the lights in them and everything. So I do all that. So I love that part. But more than anything, I probably love people. And as I said earlier, I love watching people get excited about the products that we offer. So I had a guy, actually, Jeffrey Howe. I'll give you an example. Jeffrey Howe used to be the president of the Restaurant Association for years. Prior to that, he was the maitre d' at the cannery, manager of the cannery, one of the best restaurants in Vancouver for many years. Most people don't know that anymore. But anyways, Jeffrey phoned me up one day. He says, John, I'm going to sue you. And I said, why? He says, I drop into your Main Street store to get the butter tart, and I always time it right when it's coming out of the oven. He says, but the frickin' thing, every time I bite into it, it melts like stuff all down my arm, and I have a car accident almost every time. And I said, well, Jeffrey, why don't you sit and just eat it? He says, well, that's what I choose to do, so it's on you. But he said, I love it. It's the best product I've ever had.
Oh, my go-to is the peanut butter oatmeal bar. I can't have a coffee and not have that as well.
And there's a new cookie. I wanted to call it crack, but we weren't allowed to it wasn't politically correct. Yeah. But I call it the crack cookie because it is so awesome. And it's got marshmallows, salted caramel, cornflakes. Wow. And when you bite into this thing, it's like, oh man, it's so good. And I think you can't live without it. So
who comes up with your recipes?
Julie. We steal most things. So I get to go to a lot of cafes around the world. And so I'll generally bring something back. And not too far, of course, because it goes stale, but definitely from Seattle. We go on a manager's retreat every year. So I'll give you an example of what we do, which is another thing to honor people, but it honors our company. So this crack cookie, it's called Crackle Cookie, sorry.
Crackle Cookie, that's awesome.
That was our compromise.
Yeah.
So last year, we have these leadership modules. So there's 4 parts of the leadership module, and so everybody that had passed all 4 parts, we take 1 day every 3 months, full day dedicated to training. So everybody had passed passed 4 levels in leadership, was invited to go on a 2-day trip to Seattle. But we don't just eat and drink too much. We do that, but we do more than that. And so we get a list of, we had 4 cars that went down there. So we got 20 cafes talked to people, internet or whatever, found the 20 best highly rated cafes in Seattle. And so then the first day, 1 car went to 5 cafes. And they rated we have a silent shopper audit that we do once a month. So we rated the cafes using that same criteria. So 4 cars come back. Each one of them has best of. So we have top 4. At the end of the night, we talk about it, what was so good about it, and then the next day, all 4 cars go to just those 4 cafes. Okay? So then we come back with in our mind, the top cafe in Seattle. And then we go, okay, what can we steal from this cafe?
It's like the Japanese approach. You take the best of whatever else is in the world and then make it better. Put your own twist on it.
And actually, that's exactly what Julie said. So I can't even remember which cafe we had it at, but we had this cookie, this salted caramel marshmallow cornflake cookie, because she actually is really good. She figured out what was in it. She said, John, do you want me to copy it versus making it better? I said, well, of course, Julie, make it better. So again, she did it. First crack. She came up with a cookie that was better than what we tasted. And it's been our best. So we launched that last maybe December, and it's just unbelievable.
Well, I haven't had it yet, so I'm going to try it today.
Oh, you gotta have it. You gotta have it. You'll go, why did he turn me on to that?
Right now we're in the cupping room. I've never heard that term before until the other day. You mentioned it. Can you maybe give our viewers can you describe what this whole process is?
Yeah. So we get samples from coffee from all around the world every week, and so on Wednesdays So actually Rebecca, who's Grady's assistant, roasts the coffee on what's called a sample roaster, so you can roast like 8 ounces at a time. We do that at a commercial drive store. We have a roaster in store. So she roasts on Mondays, we cup on Wednesdays, and there's 4 of us. Grady is he's our what's called a Q grader, which is like equivalent to a sommelier. It's a designation that is very hard to get. He's our Q grader, and he decides that week what we need. We might be filling a coffee in for a blend, or we might be looking at a single origin product that we want, and he'll decide what the agenda is for that day. But there's usually about 6 rounds of coffee that we're trying samples from all around the world. And cupping is really, the fancy word for it is aspirating and expectorating. But what we all know that as is slurping and spitting. So that's what we do. We take these little cups right here. We put in, I believe it's 10 grams of coffee. We add boiling water to it. We let it sit for about 3 minutes. And we take off the crust, and then we go around. We'll have 3 of each type right together. And we will take a small spoon, which we'll half fill, and then we'll spit it out. And we assess those 3 cups, number 1, to make sure that each one is consistent. If the product's not consistent, then we basically reject it right away. But then we'll compare 6 different El Salvador coffees. And all blind. We don't know how much they are. We don't know which broker they're from or which farm they're from. And everything is best cup wins. So then, and it's very rare that we don't all agree, we'll say, okay, this is the coffee we want. And we do the same pricing for all our coffee. So whatever the coffee price is, we mark it up the same. So that's how we do it. And then what we also have, which is really important, every Thursday and Friday, we have what's called a public cupping. So our head roaster, and the schedule's on our website, goes to one of our cafes. I believe it's between 12 and 2, and there's a free cupping. So any customer can go, and it's a fun thing to do in Vancouver, is just to go around and you can go to see our stores, and you can see all the coffees that we're offering in that particular week. And it's totally free. We're hoping once you try those coffees that you'll buy them. But there's a lot of people that don't ever buy anything and just kind of like they're our entourage that follow us around and want to try these coffees for free, which is totally fine because they talk to people about it.
Exactly, it's word of mouth. You mentioned that your friend and his son are entrepreneurs. Do you think entrepreneurship is hereditary?
Well, as I said, before I got into coffee, I was into social work, and I took criminology. One of the things they found, you're going to wonder where this is going, but one of the things that they found about criminals is that they have a low radical cortical inhibition. And what that is they get bored easily.
Okay.
And so a lot of criminals don't do things. They think the motivation for criminals is crime, like to steal things, but a lot of the motivation is the excitement of being a criminal.
It's the adrenaline rush.
The adrenaline rush. And most people would say that is a specific criteria of an entrepreneur.
You want the excitement of every day,
Yes.
work with people and figuring out your business and
Exactly.
what works, what
So in some ways, I would agree with you that it is hereditary. But I think the other thing, and I think a lot of people are doing studies on it nowadays because of, what they call helicopter parents that are hovering over their kids all the time. I had a background that my mom would put me out the door, and as long as I was back for dinner, it was good. I would go play in the woods, I would build forts, I would do all of that kind of stuff. So I didn't have my mom hovering over me. So yeah, I came home with, scratches and needed stitches, but it was choices that I made. The president of the science world, who's a child psychologist, was telling me that there's a certain point from about 6 years old to 14 years old where kids need to be given that freedom to make choices, which allow them to be creative and innovative. And if that doesn't get developed at that time in their life, all of a sudden you take someone that's been, helicopter parented, where they've been to piano lessons and they have to study this and they have, you know, charts all over the room and they've got to be this great student. So they might get straight A's as a result of all this, but problem solving, you know, because they haven't had to deal with real life issues, that's a part of their brain that's quite different. And so being the smartest person in the room does not make you the best CEO.
Any advice for someone who wants to be an entrepreneur or start their own business?
Yes. My biggest single advice, and I have this, I don't know much beside coffee, so I'm not going to, but I've had so many people come to me and they'll say, oh, I saw the lineups at your store and I just inherited a bunch of money. I want to open a coffee shop. And I go, guys, go work in a Starbucks for a couple years and then go around the world and look at cafes and take notes and stuff. But if you're going to do what you're going to do because you think coffee is easy, you're crazy. It's one of the most complex businesses in the world. And just like every other business. So the number one thing you can do is learn off somebody else. Number two would be, I say to people all the time, examine your life situation and be very cognizant of it. Don't let your dreams in terms of your entrepreneurial dreams screw up the rest of your life. So often people give up a lot at an early age and then at 40, 45 they go, I don't have a relationship with my wife. I don't have a relationship with my kids. My business is winning Best of Vancouver stuff, but I got nothing.
So work-life balance, basically.
Work-life balance is key. And so, you know, you take some guy like, name from again, the guy that started Walmart.
Oh, yeah, I can't think of his name either.
Yeah, but he started Walmart when he was 60.
Wow.
You know? And there's a huge number of entrepreneurs out there that started their businesses in late 40s, early 50s.
Getting the life experience.
Getting the life experience, getting, like one of the keys to a solid business is a solid home life. You know, when I started, I've had the same wife, the only wife, for 37 years. I have 4 wonderful kids, 6 grandchildren, or number 6 is on the way. And so my family life is so important to me. And I've been able to have, you know, a really good work-life balance. All my kids are, all my kids worked with me for between 10 and 14 years. And my son, Jesse, has still been with me and he loves the business. But all my other kids worked with me for that number of years. So it was really great to be able to take them to work on Saturdays when I used to work 6 days a week. But Saturdays I would have lunch with my kids. And that's how I got to know them. And I got to be up front serving customers with them in many situations.
Well, James used to be a barista. He used to compete, he told me.
He was, yeah. I think he placed number 4, actually. James was an excellent barista. Also became a driver for us, too.
So it was one way you were able to spend time with your family because they were
Exactly.
part of the business.
Yeah.
Did you have any mentors besides maybe your father and grandfather? Were they mentors, or do you mentor anybody?
I do. Yeah, my father was definitely a great mentor to me. I had a number of mentors in my life. I had one guy, I've got a Christian background, and one of the things when I was about 42, 43 was very aware to me. I was talking to somebody about Christianity, and they were saying to me, you know, the problem with Christians is they never practice what they preach. He said, you know, I've worked for all these Christian bosses, and they're bigger assholes than everybody else. And I said, really? And I said, that's kind of sad. I said, have you ever worked for a guy that you respected that said he was a Christian? He says, I have. And his name was Ken Beasley, so I sought him out. He was a younger guy than me, maybe 6 years younger, but I sought him out and I said, this is what someone has said about you. Would you meet with me once a month and tell me why that person told me about you? So I met with Ken for maybe 3 years.
Wow.
And so became a very good mentor to me, even though I was a younger man. So that's one key one. I also had a business partner for a number of years. He's no longer my partner, but he was a great mentor on the business side in terms of strategy. I do mentor people on an ongoing basis. I have one guy right now, Joel Hansen, I meet with every 6 weeks.
What's the best piece of advice you have received?
I've received so much advice. I think one of the best things I did was I didn't grow my business until I had the cash flow from my business. So it took me a long time to, I didn't open my number 4 location which was this one, until about year 6, 7. So I think the biggest problem with business is cash flow and debt, and being very cognizant about how much money you have. So many people have eyes that are bigger than their stomach. So they have this vision to have this giant company, but they're not patient enough to get there. So be patient and don't make financial decisions that are going to sink you.
Well, John, thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure speaking with you, meeting with you. And if you haven't been to a JJBEAN, why not? And if you're visiting Vancouver, make sure to stop by one of their locations here in Vancouver. Links and stuff will be in the description below, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
What's your story, Vancouver? Our city, our stories.